Alright, you guys, it's me again, Lucky. So, we're going to be talking about literary analysis essay 1 today. Okay, in this essay, it's a 2-page essay, so it's not super, super long, which has its benefits and its drawbacks. Now, I'm not limiting you to 2 pages. If you want to go more than 2 pages, please, by all means, yes, absolutely. Maybe don't write me a 10-page essay because, man, it's going to take a while to grade. So, limit it maybe to like 2 to 4 if you decide you want to go over. That rarely happens, so I'm not holding you to that. 2 pages. Now, when I say 2 pages, what do I mean? I mean full first page of content, full second page of content, and then your works cited page, right? The works cited page doesn't count in the 2-page requirement. That gets tacked on at the end. Now, speaking of the works cited page, what needs to be on it? And by extension, what do you need to reference in your essay? Well, for essay 1, you need to have 2 outside sources that interact with the story of an hour. Okay? So I'm recommending that you use Galileo because Galileo will let you filter out a lot of the sources that are not scholarly. Now, you might have questions, what is a scholarly source? My 1101 teacher didn't make us use scholarly sources. How do I know? Well, it's all about the audience and the author. Okay? So these secondary sources that are interacting with the story of an hour, what you want to do is find a source that's written by an expert in their field. So what does an expert in the field of literature look like? Well, it looks like someone who teaches at a university that teaches literature, okay? So that's the thing. That's what you want to find out. Where do they teach? If they don't teach, if this is, maybe something that Galileo doesn't filter out for you and a popular source creeps through, then what you really want to do is, kind of bin that one, right? We are not working with popular sources. Popular sources are things like magazines. They're things like websites that do literary analysis for you. Stay away from those. Some of them are good. Some of them are awful. And there's really a lot of deviation in even individual websites. Someone might think, oh, Spark Notes, Cliff Notes, but some of them are just bad. Okay, so don't even look at those. I want things from your brain. I don't want things from someone else's brain that's translated to your brain, that's translated to an essay. I want to see your ideas. I want that straight up pipeline from your brain to my brain as I'm reading it. Okay, so these scholarly sources are things that are written by an expert in the field, someone who teaches literature, for students who are becoming experts or other experts that are already in the field. Now, how in the world do you tell that? Well, like I said before, you check and see where the author works, right? Do they teach at a university? Do they teach literature? If they do, check. We've nailed it. Then you have to think, who is this written for? Is this for, a high school student who's just trying to make an A on an essay? If so, nope, we don't want it. If it's something that's more nuanced, that really digs in, you can often tell this by seeing if there's citations at the end of the essay, maybe endnotes, footnotes, citations in the essay, and that'll really give us a good indicator of whether or not this source is going to be for students who are trying to become experts or experts already. All right, so that's the way you tell if a source is scholarly. And what you do then is you look at the primary source, read that first, make sure you have a good understanding of what is happening, and then you want to think about some potential arguments that you could make, right? And so what you then do is you go on to Galileo, you type in some keywords. If you want to make an argument, say about social issues in the story of an hour, well, you could type that in. You'll probably get a bazillion results because social issues is super broad. What kind of social issues might you want to work with? Well, if you say, well, I want to work with, women's rights and feminism, then there we go. We've narrowed it, right? And I can guarantee you that you will find sources about feminism or women's rights in relation to the story of an hour. Now, of course, that always shifts depending on what the story interacts with. But, we do have that kind of framework where we can start from. And so then you can develop it further. You look at the sources that are available to you, check out the abstracts, right? The abstracts, if you remember from English 1101, that's the summary of the information in the source. So cool. How do we do abstracts? Well, it's basically the same as if you were to pick up a paperback book and read the back cover, right? That gives you the little synopsis of what it talks about. If that feels like it could be something to help you advance your argument, awesome, awesome. Save that source. Don't just leave it on the internet, because sometimes Galileo will move things, or even other like Google Scholar will move things, and then you won't be able to find them later. Save them onto your desktop in a folder or something like that, so that way you can go back to it and really see your sources again and again, because that's going to benefit you. If you spend 2 hours like next week looking for your source again, well, then you're just wasting 2 hours. Don't do that to yourself. I've been there. It's awful, and it made me download everything. Okay, so what you want to do once you find sources that you feel like would advance your argument, or that you don't like, you feel like is undermining, like is just making a ridiculous claim, then you can use that too, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be things that you agree with completely. It can be things that you disagree with, and then you can explain why you disagree with them. And don't feel weird, like, oh, they're experts. Oh, I don't want to say anything wrong. Guess what? They're not going to know. And it's not going to hurt you, because it does ultimately benefit the literary analysis field as a whole to have different perspectives. You'll actually see in some of your sources that they will disagree with one another fairly consistently, right? So, you make sure that you feel free enough to agree or disagree, and both kinds of sources can actually benefit your argument, okay? So you've got 2 pages. You've got 3 sources, right? Your primary source, which for the first essay is the story of an hour, right? It's that short story, poem, or play, whatever piece of literature you're working with. And then you have 2 scholarly secondary sources for this first essay. You have to make sure you reference each of them in your essay. And your primary source should be referenced most, okay? That's the big thing. Right? So in terms of requirements for quotations or paraphrases, you need to reference your primary source at least 4 times, okay, in a 2-page essay. It's really not that hard. So basically like 1 time per paragraph at bare minimum. Now, of course, you can reference more. If you look at the sample essay, you'll see that the primary source is referenced like a bajillion times, okay? And that's because anytime you make an assertion, anytime you analyze something and say, okay, this is part of my argument, let me put it out there, you need to back that up. And it could be a full sentence, it could be a little group of words like the sample typically does, but you really want to make sure your reader can see where your idea is substantiated. And then you bring in your secondary sources at least once per secondary source, right? So, reference each one at least 1 time. And you'll notice in the sample as well, I think one of the sources gets referenced twice, one of them gets referenced once, and that's the secondary sources. Now, the sample essay is 3.5 pages long, so, even in such a decent length, right, you can see that the crux of the argument and the sources used is going to be on that primary source. So you really want to make sure that the primary source is focused on most heavily. Okay, that's the big thing. And I see that happening where, it's more the secondary sources fairly often, which is why I'm kind of harping on this. But primary source, reference it more, okay, at least 4 times. And then the secondary sources reference each one at least 1 time, okay? So you really, that's basically the building blocks. Now, for this essay, how many paragraphs do I need? It's 2 pages. Well, I would say absolutely max out at 5 paragraphs, right? An intro, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. If you felt like you could make your argument in 4 paragraphs, an intro, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion, go for that, okay? Either way, of course, more points is always going to be beneficial, but if you have more points, meaning your body paragraphs, to help support your overall argument, that are not fully developed, it's going to be much less helpful than 2 or less fully developed points, okay? So make sure that in your development of your analysis, you are being very clear as to what points you're trying to make, how it helps advance the argument that you've created, and also that you have plenty of evidence to show your reader that, yes, this is a valid perspective. Now, of course, don't make every single sentence all information from a source, because that's not going to be beneficial to you. Now, you might say, hey, the sample has like a citation for every sentence. Yes, it does. But if you look at the sentence, most of them actually have some form of analysis, and then the information from the source to back it up, right? So each sentence does two things, and then they build on one another. And of course, in the sample, those sections from the primary and secondary sources are much smaller. It's groups of 3 to 4 words for the most part that then are kind of stacked on one another. You don't want to have full paragraphs of just information from sources. That's not explaining it. There's no analysis there. It's ultimately just, this is what the source said. Cool, let's throw it in. Let's get this done. Throw it in. I don't want to see that. I want to see your ideas. Those ideas are the most important thing. All right, so hopefully that kind of gives you a rundown of what the expectations for Essay 1 is about. If you have any questions, as always, text me, call me, come to office hours, send me an email, ask during class sessions once they start up, and just let me know where you're struggling, and we'll work through it together, figure out exactly what's going on. All right, have a great rest of your day, guys. I will see you next time. Bye.